Hey everybody, welcome back to another Headrush how-to. In this one I want to discuss something I've touched on in several videos as of late, which is the importance of gain staging, all the way from the input block to the output block on the Headrush pedal board, and then to whatever playback device you're using, whether it be an FR speaker, you're using a power amp and a real guitar cab, or using the return of a tube amp. So there's just a couple of crucial steps that you want to take and some things to keep in mind, and I'm going to show you all of those just real quickly. So let's just take a quick look at the input block. We'll start right in there. We have the gain, which controls obviously the input gain going into the Headrush. I don't mess with this too much because I want all of my guitars to have different input levels, unless maybe they're the same guitar. Like if I had 2 or 3 of these and I brought them to shows as a backup in case a string breaks on one, but maybe the pickup height is different, or for some reason one is just putting out a whole lot more volume than the other. Maybe in that case I would want to have something prepared, but in general, I want a weaker input signal from single coils because the amps just respond differently that way. I want, from an active pickup, I want that thing to be pretty cooking because that's why I got an active pickup guitar, for kind of like a hot rodded humbucker kind of thing, like the quantum pickups in this Ibanez. I want that going on, so I typically stay away from the gain block. But just real quick, so you can see that there's this level meter right here for the input. You cannot clip this thing. You would have to plug in, you'd have to plug in like the output of a tube amp or something to get this thing to overdrive. Totally safe going right up to that 0 mark. In reality, it's probably going way past it. We just can't see it. But you're gonna see this. Right? And as you roll the guitar volume knob down, you'll see this. Right, so all stuff that we want. We like this in the real world. We like amp dynamics, rolling the volume knob up and down for different stuff. So that's all cool. After that, you've got the input gate threshold, which does exactly what it says if you've ever used real noise gate pedals. Basically, all the way to the left is the gate off. I don't know if that noise is coming through on the USB, but just know that minus 120 dB is the gate all the way off. You can see I typically run at about like 57. It's not too extreme. It's a little bit less than right up the middle. You can make it really extreme if you're maybe doing the real brutal metal stuff. Maybe you want to raise that gate a little bit. And then after that, you've got the gate release, which is basically the moment you stop playing and the guitar is muted, the Headrush isn't receiving signal anymore. How long you're telling it how long you want that gate to remain open, which you want a little bit of that going on because it helps with like chord ring outs. I don't know if I'll be able to demonstrate this properly, but 20 milliseconds seems pretty all right for me. Now see, it took 20 milliseconds after going behind this white line where we have the gate set for the gate to click on, and basically our volume to get cut off. If you were to lower that to like 1 millisecond all the way down, you would get a lot less of that. So your chord hangs might cut off way too soon. Stuff like that. So just keep that reasonable. And then after that, you've got a noise filter. You can hear that better with the gate completely off. I don't know if it'll come through over USB. I wasn't able to test that, but basically, it controls things like 60 cycle hum, ground loop hum. You can get a bunch of that stuff out of there. It does clean up on really gainy amps. It helps clean up kind of the crap and the scratchiness going on. But I find that the higher you turn this thing up, which you can get to minus 60, it can dull the sound a little bit. It works better actually in the front, in the input block, rather than using the pedal version of this. There's both a gate and a noise filter block available to place anywhere you want in your rig. To me, those are kind of useless. I've got it built in here, and they're kind of waste of space. I can see reasons why you might want to place a noise gate after an amp block rather than have it at the front of your rig. But in general, for my purposes and for the trade-offs of having to spend a block on something that I have for free in the input block, I don't really use that stuff. And then you've got this parameter section here, which basically just goes from locked to unlocked. What that's for is every time you create a new rig or just switch between rigs, those things maybe you spent a lot of time creating a rig for, like, you've got a Telecaster going on, and like an AC30. Your next rig is you had made something for like a Super Strat. You're using a Soldano with tons and tons of gain on it. So you changed gate settings, you changed gain input settings, noise filter settings, all that kind of stuff. That's going to change in between those two rigs unless you set it to locked, which mine actually is set to locked usually. And you'll know it's locked when this little lock here turns red. But that's just what I like to do. It keeps it the same across all of your rigs. It takes one less variable away from screwing anything up. After that, we've got the output block, which is pretty simple. So you've got rig output, which is monitoring the output levels from the XLR outputs, and alternate output is going to be, well, whatever you set it to, because the XLRs can even be an alternate output. Say you go into global settings, and you've got this section right here. You've got the alternate output source. You can change that. I'll make a video on what all of this means, but basically, you can change all of your outputs to come from different sources within your rig, which is really, really useful. But so your rig volume up here on the top right controls volume coming out of the XLR outputs. 2 amp gain controls volume coming out of the 1/4 inch outputs, and rig width controls your stereo spread. Basically, I don't do anything stereo. I think there's really not a whole lot of benefit to using stereo in a live situation, which is 99% of my use case for the Headrush pedal board. It doesn't really benefit the audience any, and there's just stuff that can go wrong between the panning and sound guys screwing stuff up. No offense to sound guys, but it's just not common. You know, a lot of the big dogs can get away with this stuff, but average kind of people like us aren't really doing a ton of this stereo stuff in a manner that's beneficial to us and the audience at the same time. But so as far as setting rig output, I've mentioned gain staging a bunch of times in past videos that I've made and how important it is, because you don't want this to happen, right? Okay, see how it went all the way into the red? That doesn't sound good. It's potentially dangerous to your equipment, to the Headrush, to your listening device, Headrush, FRFR speakers, your studio monitors, if your solid state power amp or tube power amp and cab. it can be detrimental to those things. So always make sure you're not in red, and always protect your equipment by testing these things with the master volume on the Headrush completely off, or at least really low. Um, so I've got a plexi rig going here, and my goal, I usually try to go with about 3 to 4 bars below that 0 mark, just to give myself room for a lead boost when everything's said and done. So I already have the rig gain staged to be that way. I did my volume adjustment through the impulse response, actually. I set that to minus 18 dB rather than changing the rig volume. It doesn't matter at which spot you change that volume, just as long as you get there. But so this is where we're at. All right, so when I'm really digging into this plexi, you can see I'm like 2 or 3 bars below the 0 mark, and hopefully I've left myself room for a solo boost, which I use this graphic EQ for, which is cutting some lows, boosting some mids, and adding some gain. So let's add like a lot of gain through that, right? And see what happens. So if I turn that on, right, you're playing along, and you didn't test this before you went to play out or practice, and your big solo comes up and this happens. All right, so not loud enough. I want to try and hit that red. Let's go with like, we can only go to 6. All right, so you're probably pretty safe there, but I don't even want to get in that yellow territory. So something reasonable, like 2 to 3 decibels is totally fine. That's plenty of lead boost anyway, especially when you're also frequency shaping. Like we're pushing the crap out of these mids. That's going to be plenty audible when the time comes. But here we are. Okay, so we are tickling that yellow just a little bit. That's not the end of the world. Red is where you want to stay away from. But just to be safe, what I'm going to do is further lower the volume by the same amount that I'm boosting it by with my lead boost. And I'll wind up right here. Alright, so now we're well below the 0, and that probably came through quieter now, but relative to the space I've got left on my Headrush's master volume, that is going to give me an overall volume boost when it comes time to solo. So speaking of the master volume control on the Headrush, there's a lot of people that kind of worry about how do I set what. So my basic rule is get this part straightened out. Get the rig output straightened out. Right? You're safe there. You've tested your lead boost. You're all good. And then what I do from there generally is I turn that Headrush master volume all the way up to 11. So it's the hottest possible signal that I can get going out of that. I usually give sound guys a warning, like, hey, the signal coming out of my board here is pretty hot, so just be careful as you're turning that up. As you're turning that up. But for me, that takes away one more variable. Stuff like you can run along and accidentally tap this volume, this master volume with your foot, like half an inch or an inch, and that's going to make a big difference in the volume and therefore the sound, because volume affects tone. But I would make sure that that's always cranked to 11. That way you kind of have a consistent, like controlled monitoring spot. And then from there, adjust the input volume of your playback device, whether it be like an FR speaker, like this guy behind me, or some kind of power amp and guitar. Make sure you're not clipping your power amps. They usually have indicators for that kind of thing. But yeah, leave the Headrush master volume cranked at 11. Be aware too that that volume can be affected. It's generally not affected by any kind of dirt pedals going into the front of amps, but it is affected by like changing amps, right? Going from like a Fender Twin to a Plexi or a Soldano. Those amps all have built-in volume differences, which is a good thing because that means, you know, the modeling is a lot more realistic to life, because uh, you know, two amps typically aren't going to be just as loud as each other. Um, what else would change that? So things like solo boosts, impulse responses. You even have so be careful with this one, right? We've got the BBD delay here in the Headrush. Let's go with the default. This little input gain thing, if you just bring that up by 5%, that's going to make your rig a whole lot louder. So be mindful of stuff like that. You know, now you've created another point at which you want to just double check your outputs to keep everything safe and for things to sound correct. I kind of think I've beaten this topic to death, and I'm about ready to wrap it up. Thanks for watching, guys, and you know, just remember to gain stage properly and take that variable out of tweaking and playing with gear, and just tweaking and playing with gear and just having more fun just playing guitar. All right, thank you.